Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Earlier this week, the Eastern European country Belarus stopped a plane travelling from Greece to Lithuania. While on the ground, they took and arrested two of the passengers. This episode of Thinking in English will look at what happened, why Belarus took this action, and what some of the potential consequences could be for the country. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all of the transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Aboard. Aboard. On or onto a ship, aircraft, bus, or train. As in, the flight attendant welcomed us aboard. To escort. To escort. To escort means to go with a person or a vehicle, especially to make sure that he, she, or it leaves or arrives safely. For example, security guards escorted the intruders from the building. To hijack. To hijack. To hijack means to take control of an aircraft or another vehicle during a journey, especially using violence. For instance, two men hijacked a jet travelling to Paris. Fraudulently. Fraudulently. In a way that intends to deceive by doing something dishonest and illegal. For example, someone has been fraudulently using my name. Exile. Exile. Exile is the condition of someone being sent or kept away from their own country, village, etc., especially for political reasons. As in, the king went into exile because of the political situation in his country. Repression. Repression. Repression is the use of force or violence to control a group of people. The political repression in this country is enforced by terror. Dissident. Dissident. A dissident is a person who publicly disagrees with and criticizes their government. As in, the government has been repressing political dissidents. To divert. To divert. To divert means to cause something or someone to change direction. For example, our flight has to be diverted to Newark because of the storm. Earlier this week, a Ryanair aeroplane flying from Greece to Lithuania received a warning from authorities that there may be a security threat aboard the aircraft. That warning came from the Eastern European country of Belarus, and the Belarusian government sent a military fighter jet to escort the plane to the city of Minsk. Just before the plane reached the Lithuanian airspace, the plane was forced to turn around and land in Belarus. There was no security threat found on the plane, even though the passengers and luggage were searched for several hours. The plane eventually took off again and finished its journey, landing in Lithuania. However, two passengers were missing. These two passengers were a Belarusian journalist called Roman Protasevich and his Russian girlfriend. Roman Protasevich is a well-known activist and critic of the president of Belarus. It quickly became clear that Belarus hijacked the aircraft and lied about the security threats just to arrest the opposition journalist and activist. There was never any sign of a bomb. There was never any threat against the aircraft. And in any case, the closest airport to the plane was not even in Belarus. So why did Belarus want to arrest these people? This episode of Thinking in English will try to provide some context as to why Belarus did this, and also explore some of the consequences of this decision. Belarus is an Eastern European country and a former member of the Soviet Union. The country is known as the last dictatorship in Europe. The president, Alexander Lukashenko, who personally ordered the Ryanair plane to land, was elected in 1994 and has stayed in power for the last 26 years. Last year, according to many election experts, he fraudulently declared victory in the nation's elections, and then went to arrest and torture many people who protested against his government. By December last year, 30,000 people had been detained and more than 4,000 claimed to have been tortured, according to Nasz Dom, a Belarusian NGO. Unlike some other former Soviet countries, Belarus has remained very close to Russia politically and economically. In fact, Russia's support has helped maintain a decent standard of living in his country, better than in many other former Soviet states, which for many years has kept the people relatively happy and the president in power. Protests against the leader and government are continuing, but the numbers of people attending them have begun to fall. So, who is Roman Protasevich? Roman Protasevich is a 26-year-old journalist who used to work for a Poland-based online news service called Nexta, which is known for broadcasting videos of protests against Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko last year. He now works for a different organization known as Belarmova. Protasevich fled the country in 2019, and he has been living in exile ever since. While he was being taken away from the flight, he told one of the other passengers, "I am facing the death penalty." And after his arrest, he now faces extremism charges in Belarus, including organizing mass riots and inciting social hatred. All of this is related to the protests late last year. And apparently, this could lead to 15 years in jail. So why was Roman Protasevich targeted? Why did the country feel he was so important that they needed to hijack a plane to capture him? President Lukashenko has long targeted journalists who report the reality of the situation in his country. Nexta is also described as an extremist organization by Belarus, and perhaps the president is trying to scare all journalists, bloggers, or online content creators reporting in the country. Moreover, it demonstrates how even people abroad reporting on Belarus are at risk. Human rights organizations have pointed to a new type of practice that some authoritarian countries are increasingly using. They call these practices transnational repression. Transnational means something occurring across borders. In simple terms, authoritarian countries are becoming more comfortable repressing their enemies overseas, away from their own country. They seem to no longer respect passports, borders, diplomatic customs, or the rules of air traffic control. These countries will arrest or kill enemies anywhere in the world, no matter what country the enemy is in, what laws they are breaking, or what nationality or citizenship the enemy has. Let me give you some examples. In recent years, Russia has used advanced poisons to attempt to kill political dissidents in the British cities of London and Salisbury. Saudi Arabia murdered a citizen in the country's embassy in Istanbul. Iran has assassinated enemies in the Netherlands and Turkey. And China has kidnapped and arrested Chinese nationals living abroad. Belarus's decision to divert the plane perfectly fits in with these other examples of transnational repression. What are some of the consequences of Belarus's actions? Well, numerous Western leaders have openly and strongly condemned the hijacking, and often they have demanded the release of the arrested couple. Latvia, another European country, has already expelled the Belarus ambassador, and Britain has already banned Belarus's national airline from flying into the UK. There are likely to be further sanctions and economic punishments from the EU and other EU member countries. Already, looking at some online flight data, it suggests that almost every airline is avoiding Belarus's airspace. And apparently, very soon, Belarus's airlines are going to be unable to fly over Europe. It also sets a dangerous precedent. With hundreds of thousands of flights and millions of passengers taking to the skies every year, what happens if more countries follow Belarus's example? There are a lot of countries out there, and a lot of these countries have a lot of enemies. What happens if an activist from Hong Kong flies over China and China takes that plane? What happens if an enemy of the USA flies over America or flies over an American overseas territory and the USA takes that plane? Belarus is often one of the forgotten countries of Europe. And I guess this is because it has little relationship with any country other than Russia. But this event might make other European powers more concerned over how Belarus runs its country. And especially if Belarus continues targeting its enemies overseas. Here is today's final thought. This episode of Thinking in English has looked at some of the recent events regarding Belarus's capture of a Ryanair flight. It has quickly become clear that they were targeting an opposition journalist and activist. I have talked about some of the context of this situation, the reasons why Belarus committed such an act, and some of the possible consequences. But what do you think? Why did Belarus do this? Does this incident concern you? Are you going to be more concerned, criticizing countries or taking flights? Let me know. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.